The Last Ledger of Elias Hawthorne. The first frost came early to Hollow Creek, Pennsylvania, the kind that bit the knuckles and turned breath into ghosts. Elias Hawthorne, 87 years old and still stubborn as the ironwood fence posts he'd set in 1962, stood on the porch of the farmhouse he'd been born in. His hands, gnarled like the roots of the sugar maples lining the drive, clutched a chipped enamel mug. The coffee inside had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he drank it anyway. Waste was a sin his mother had drilled into him with a switch and a Bible verse. Behind him, the screen door creaked. His granddaughter, Ruth, stepped out in her city coat too thin for October and wrapped her arms around herself. "Grandpa, the realtor's coming at 10. You sure you won't?" "I'm sure," Elias said, voice rough as the gravel under his boots. "Ain't sellin' the place to some developer who'll pave it for condos. Land's been Hawthorne since 1798. Stays that way." Ruth sighed. She was 32, a lawyer in Philadelphia, and carried the weary patience of someone who'd argued with brick walls. "The taxes, Grandpa. The roof. You can't keep up anymore." He turned then, eyes the pale blue of winter sky, and looked at her the way he used to look at colts that needed breaking, gentle, but unyielding. "I kept up when your daddy ran off. Kept up when the bank tried to take it in '83. Kept up when your grandma took sick. I'll keep up till I'm in the ground." Ruth opened her mouth, closed it. She knew the stories. Everyone in Hollow Creek did. Elias Hawthorne, who'd lost a son to Vietnam, a wife to cancer, and still rose every dawn to milk cows that were long gone. The farm had shrunk over decades, sold off parcel by parcel to pay debts, but the house and the 20 acres around it remained. A stubborn island in a sea of corn and regret. Inside, the realtor, a young man in a shiny suit, waited with forms. Elias ignored him. He walked down the steps, boots crunching frost, and headed for the barn. The ledger was calling. Chapter 2, The Ledger. Word count, 1,298. The barn smelled of hay, dust, and old leather. Sunlight slanted through gaps in the siding, illuminating motes that danced like slow fireflies. Elias moved past the rusted tractor, past the stalls where Bessie and Clover once lowed for grain, to the far corner where a pine trunk sat beneath a tarp. He lifted the tarp. The trunk was locked with a brass padlock older than Ruth. From his pocket he drew a key on a rawhide cord, the metal warmed from his chest. The lock clicked open like a sigh. Inside, yellowed newspapers, a child's wooden soldier, a faded ribbon from the 1944 county fair. And beneath it all, the ledger. It was bound in cracked calfskin, the word ledger embossed in gold that had mostly flaked away. Elias lifted it with reverence, as if it might crumble. The pages were thick, handmade, and filled with his own handwriting, decades of it. He carried it to the workbench, brushed off sawdust, and opened to a fresh page. The last entry was dated March 12, 2001, the day his wife, Clara, died. He'd written, "She asked for the blue quilt. I brought the green. Lord forgive me." Today he would write again. Dip pen. Ink well. The nib scratched. October 14, 2023. The frost came early. Ruth wants to sell. I said no. But the truth is I'm tired. Bones ache like rusted gates. Dreams full of fire and screaming. Tommy's face in the jungle. Clara calling from the porch that isn't there anymore. Maybe it's time. He paused, staring at the words. Then, on impulse, turned back to the first page, dated June 3, 1951. Tommy born today. 8 pounds 2 ounces. Clara cried when they put him in her arms. I stood outside the window like a fool, too scared to go in. Afraid I'd break him. Elias's finger traced the ink. He remembered the weight of that infant, the way Tommy's tiny fist had curled around his thumb. Remembered, too, the letter that came 17 years later, "We regret to inform you." A sound, boots on gravel. Ruth's voice calling. He closed the ledger, slipped it under his coat, and went out to meet the day. The realtor left with unsigned papers and a bruised ego. Ruth stayed for lunch, venison stew from the freezer, biscuits from a can. She watched her grandfather eat in silence, then said, "There's something I didn't tell you." Elias raised an eyebrow. "I hired someone to help clean out the attic. He starts tomorrow. Name's Jacob Miller. Says he's from Hollow Creek, but I don't remember him." "Miller," Elias muttered. "Old sharecropper's name. Probably kin to the ones worked the south field in the 30s. Ruth hesitated. "He's young. 25, maybe. But he asked about you. Specifically." Elias grunted. Curious folk always do. That night, he dreamed of fire. A village in Vietnam, huts burning, a boy no older than Tommy would have been running with something in his arms. Elias woke gasping, the ledger clutched to his chest like a shield. Morning brought Jacob Miller. He was tall, lean, with dark hair and eyes the color of river stones. His hands were calloused, but his speech was careful, like someone who'd learned words from books. He carried a canvas tool bag and a quiet that made the barn cats watch him. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said, offering a hand. "Jacob Miller. Ruth hired me." Elias shook it. The grip was firm, familiar. "You work hard, you eat. That's the rule." Jacob nodded. "Yes, sir." They started in the attic. Dust thick as flour, trunks older than the Republic. Jacob lifted boxes without complaint, but his eyes kept drifting to the ledger Elias had brought up to inventory. "What's that?" he asked finally. "Family business," Elias said. "You read?" "Some." Elias opened to a random page. August 1968, Tommy enlisted. Said it was his duty. I called him a fool. Should have hugged him. Jacob read aloud, voice soft. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. My grandpa was in 68. Key San. Elias stared. What was his name? Thomas Miller. Went by Tommy. The attic tilted. Elias gripped the beam. Tommy Miller was my son. Jacob's face drained of color. I didn't know. My mom said he died before I was born. Grandma raised me. She kept a letter you wrote. He reached into his bag, pulled out a folded sheet yellowed with age. Elias took it with shaking hands. Dear Mrs. Miller. I'm sorry. I should have stopped him. Should have dragged him home. He was a good boy. Tell his child, when he comes, that his daddy was brave. Elias Hawthorne. Elias sank onto a trunk. Jacob sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Jacob said, I came back to Hollow Creek to find you. To give you this. He pulled a small wooden box from his bag. Inside, a bronze star, a faded photo of a young soldier grinning beside a helicopter, and a single dog tag. Elias's hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped it. The tag read, Miller, Thomas J. I thought he was lost, Elias whispered. They said no remains. He wrote Grandma from a hospital in Da Nang. Said if anything happened, send the tag to you. Took 55 years to get here. That night, Elias wrote until the lamp burned low. October 16, 2023. Jacob is Tommy's boy. My blood. He brought the tag. I held it and felt the years fall away. Clara would have cried. I did, but quiet so he wouldn't hear. Tomorrow I tell him the truth about the fire. He didn't sleep. At dawn, he found Jacob in the barn, oiling the old McCormick tractor that hadn't run since 1998. Boy, Elias said, we need to talk. They walked the south field, frost crunching underfoot. Elias told him everything. In February 1968, Tommy had come home on leave. Drunk on youth and righteousness, he'd argued with his father about the war. Elias, haunted by his own father's stories of mustard gas in France, had called the war a meat grinder. Tommy stormed out, enlisted the next day. 3 months later, a letter, Tommy was MIA after a firefight near Khe Sanh. Official story, presumed dead. But rumors persisted. A villager claimed an American soldier saved children from a burning hut, carried a wounded comrade miles through jungle, then vanished. Elias had clung to that rumor like a drowning man to driftwood. For years, he'd written letters to the army, to senators, to God. Nothing. Now Jacob listened, face unreadable. When Elias finished, he said, "Grandma kept another letter. From a nurse. Said Tommy lived long enough to ask her to tell you he was sorry. That he understood." Elias fell to his knees in the frosted grass. The earth was cold, real. He pressed the dog tag to his lips and wept without shame. Winter arrived early. A nor'easter barreled up the coast, dumping snow that bent the pines and buried the road. Power failed. The farmhouse groaned like an old ship. Jacob stayed. He chopped wood, fixed the generator, cooked beans and cornbread over the fireplace. Ruth called from Philadelphia, frantic, but the lines were down. One night, the wind howled like banshees. Elias sat by the fire, ledger open. Jacob read over his shoulder. December 25, 1975. Clara made Tommy's favorite pie. We left a slice on the porch. Snow filled the plate by morning. She said he'd come when he was ready. I stopped believing. Jacob closed the book gently. You ever think he did come? In a way? Elias looked at him, really looked. The boy had Tommy's jaw, Clara's eyes. Every day. The next morning, the storm broke. Sunlight on snow so bright it hurt. They dug out the truck, drove to town for supplies. At the diner, old men stared. Word had spread, the Hawthorne place had a stranger, a miller. Elias paid no mind. He bought nails, salt, a new axe handle. On impulse, he stopped at the florist and bought a single red rose. Back home, he laid it on Clara's grave behind the house. The stone read, Clara Hawthorne, 1935 to 2001, beloved wife and mother. Jacob stood beside him. She'd like the boy you brought home. Elias nodded. She always said family wasn't just blood. Spring came slow. Jacob fixed the roof, rebuilt the chicken coop, planted tomatoes in the kitchen garden. Ruth visited weekends, bringing city groceries and legal papers. One Saturday, she spread documents on the table. Grandpa, listen. There's a conservation trust. They'll pay the taxes, put the land in perpetuity. You keep the house, lifetime rights. Jacob could stay, farm it. Elias stared at the papers. And after I'm gone? It stays wild. No condos. Tommy's woods. He looked at Jacob, who nodded. I'd like that, sir. If you'll have me. Elias signed. His hand shook, but the pen didn't falter. That night, he wrote. April 22, 2024. Signed the land away, not sold, saved. Jacob planted the first tomato. Ruth smiled like Clara used to. I feel lighter. Maybe forgiveness is just letting go. Summer brought heat and cicadas. The ledger filled with small joys, Jacob's first harvest, Ruth's promotion, the day the tractor roared to life after 25 years. But some nights, Elias woke screaming. The fire dream again, huts burning, a boy running. Only now the boy had Jacob's face. One August evening, thunderheads piled like bruises. Jacob found Elias in the barn, staring at the ledger's final blank pages. I need to tell you something, Jacob said. About the fire. Elias stiffened. My mom kept a journal. Grandma gave it to me after she died. Tommy wrote to the nurse from the hospital. He said, Jacob's voice cracked. He said he started the fire. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Elias couldn't breathe. He was on patrol. Village suspected of harboring Viet Cong orders were to burn the huts if they didn't cooperate. Tommy refused. His CO threatened court-martial. In the chaos, a flare went off. Napalm canister. Tommy tried to put it out, pulled kids from the flames. Got burned bad. The army covered it up, said enemy action. Elias sank onto a hay bale. All these years. I thought he was a hero. He was, Jacob said fiercely. He chose kids over orders. Died 3 days later. Silence stretched. Then Elias opened the ledger, turned to a new page. August 14, 2024. Tommy didn't run into the fire. He ran toward it. My boy chose mercy. I choose to remember that. Fall again. The maples bled red. Elias's hands failed him now, arthritis like claws. Jacob wrote for him, reading aloud each night. On November 10, 2025, Elias woke knowing. The ache in his chest wasn't age. It was farewell. He called Jacob and Ruth to the bedroom. The ledger lay open on the quilt Clara had pieced from Tommy's old shirts. Read the last part, he said. Jacob's voice trembled. November 9, 2025. The circle closes. Jacob tills the land Tommy would have loved. Ruth carries the name forward. I carried guilt long enough. Time to lay it down. Tell the crows I'm coming. Tell Clara the blue quilt's waiting. Elias smiled. Add this, I was wrong about many things. But I was right to love. Jacob wrote it, tears falling on the page. That night, Elias slipped away. No pain. Just the sense of a hand in his Clara's, maybe Tommy's. The ledger slid from his fingers to the floor, open to the final entry. They buried Elias beside Clara, beneath the sugar maple he'd planted the year Tommy was born. Jacob spoke at the grave. He taught me land isn't just dirt. It's memory. Promise. Love that outlasts us. The Conservation Trust honored the deed. The farm became the Hawthorne Miller Preserve, 20 acres of woods, fields, and a farmhouse where Jacob and his new wife raised 3 children who called Ruth Auntie and learned to milk goats before they could read. The ledger stayed in the pine trunk, added to each year. Jacob's entries spoke of droughts and weddings, of a daughter named Clara who won the county fair ribbon in 2031, of a son named Tommy who fixed tractors before he was 10. In 2040, a great-grandchild found an old dog tag in the attic. Asked Jacob, who was Thomas J. Miller? Jacob smiled, opened the ledger to the first page, and began to read. The moral of the last ledger of Elias Hawthorne is: forgiveness heals what time cannot, and love, flawed, stubborn, and enduring, outlives guilt, loss, and even death itself. Elias carries a lifetime of regret for words unsaid to his son, for mistakes he couldn't undo, for a war that stole his boy. But in the end, he learns that holding on to pain doesn't honor the dead, letting go, and choosing love in the present, does. Through Jacob, he sees that family is not just blood, but the choice to show up, to listen, to plant seeds for a future you won't live to see. The ledger isn't just a record of debts and harvests, it's proof that a life well lived is measured not in perfection, but in the courage to keep writing, even when the hand trembles.